Welcome back, everybody. In our last video, we took you through the analytics section, which showed you all of the data information that was collected on our site that was run in Camden Town. In this video, we're going to show you how that information is then translated into our appraisal functionalities input section. So if we click on the Site Inputs tab, it will take you into the format through which we operate our appraisal inputs. So you can see, if we just scroll down really quickly, you can see all of the purple boxes in this tab are effectively pre-populated assumptions that can then be modified by the user. Now, it could be that you're modifying them to run different scenarios, or it could be a difference in opinion, or a clash with information that you've received elsewhere. That's fine. The whole idea of the feasibility app is that you are allowed to go back in and change any of the assumptions that have been pre-populated. So if we start with the top table, the site and user information, there is quite simply just a site name and address, quite generically, and put it into that box that you can then go and change as you see fit, as well as a scenario box. So because all of the sites and scenarios can be saved into a kind of managed database, it's quite important to keep this scenario box quite descriptive, because when you go back and try and load sites or compare them side by side, it's quite useful to know kind of what scenario was run for that site version. And if we go to the key assumptions table, we have the appraisal methodology. So it's defaulted to calculate residual land value, which quite literally means that the profit assumption is fixed, and then the residual land value is calculated as an output. But you can actually reverse that, where if we calculate development profit instead, it will basically take the £4 million benchmark land value as the land value and then calculate what the profit is as an output. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to keep it at calculate residual land value. And then lastly, in that box, we have the number of units. So you'll recognize 27 units from our last video, which is what our capacity algorithm calculated to be how many flats could go on this site feasibly. We then have a non-residential use types box, which will have 6 commercial use types: retail, office, industrial, leisure, health, and community. Now, when a site's been run, these will automatically be set at 0 square meters. We don't have any functionality that will estimate what the kind of non-resi uses should be on that site. But the purpose of this input tab is that it allows you to put some in if you want to. So you can enter in a number of square meters for any of these use types, and it will flow through into the appraisal technology. Next, we have the residential tenure mix. Again, you'll remember from the affordable policy that given kind of proven financial constraints, that 35% could be an appropriate affordable provision. So that's been carried forward into this tab. And then below those headings, we have sub-tenures. So below private, we have market sale and market rent. We've set 100% to market sale. And then below affordable, we have shared ownership, first homes, affordable rent, LLR, LHA, LAR, and target rent. Now, you remember from the policy, it's a 60-40 affordable intermediate split. So 40% has been allocated to shared ownership, and then the remaining 60 is split between affordable rents and target rent per the local plan of London. Next is the residential type and bed mix. So we have a flat mix set at 100%, and you remember from the previous video that this is a central location in London, and therefore a house-led development is not quite as realistic. But that being said, if you wanted to set this to 0%, it would then move this to a house-led development. Or you could go somewhere in between and go 50-50. It's up to you, really. But for the purposes of this video, again, we'll go back to 100% flats. And then below that, we have a split between 1, 2, 3, and 4 beds. And that's split 40, 40, 20%. But again, any of these can be changed as you see fit. That takes us to the flat capital values. So in the top row, we have the unit sizes, which is quite simply just the size of that unit in square meters, which can be modified from the default inputs. We then have a gross size. So this can be done 2 different ways. So you can either do a net divided by gross percentage. So we set it at 80%. Or you can also just enter in a square meter amount on a GIA basis. But we'll go back to the net divided by gross. Next, we have the market sale input. So this can be done in 2 different ways. So you can do it as a pound per unit assumption or a pound per square meter assumption. And you will recognize in the pound per unit, you'll know these numbers from the flat values tab. So these have just been carried directly into this tab from that section. And that pretty much pertains to any assumption in this tab. So it's quite useful to be able to understand where they came from and what data supports them. Now, This is where, for example, if you did disagree with any of these, you can go and change these to a pretty good degree of accuracy. So if you thought 530 was too low, you could go and put 550,000 instead. And then that will carry through into the appraisal output as we run through this. Or alternatively, you thought 530 was too high, you could bring it back down to £500,000. And again, you can do that for any of these. Next, we have the shared ownership. So for the PRS or private rent and the affordable 10 years, you basically have 4 options of inputting the sales values. You'll see that it's been defaulted to DCF, which is that discounted cash flow calculator we talked about in the previous video. And you'll see that these boxes are white, which effectively means that they're not able to be changed and they're obviously being calculated elsewhere. We'll get to where they're being calculated and how in a second. But real quick, we'll just run through the other options you have. So you can toggle this to pound per unit, which will change that to purple, and then you can go and alter these numbers as you see fit. There's a pound per square meter option, and there's also a percentage of market sale option. So this will just take, in this instance, 70% of the market sale values inputted above. But if we just go back to the DCF, I'm just going to take you through how these are calculated and where. So you'll see that all 3 of these are set DCF. And if we go to the top, you will then see the equivalent SODCF, FRDCF, and target DCF. So that's shared ownership, affordable rents, and target rent DCFs. Now, if we click into these, so if I click into the shared ownership, for instance, you will recognize that £369,000 DCF from the Home tab. Now, if we scroll down, you'll see there's a number of assumptions that will flow through into the DCF calculator. And you can see the output of that down below. So that will show you the receipts based on 25% of equity stake, the resulting net rent, the total net position year on year, the discount rate, the DCF total, and the cumulative total. And you can look at this for any of the bed types for either flats or houses. Now, the power of this tool is that as you update these, it will automatically update these values. So again, if we look at £369,000 for a 1-bed, if we were to go and change the discount rate from 5.25, for example, to 5.5, you can say all of these have actually dropped down. So this has gone down by about £9,000. And again, you can do these for any of these assumptions. And if you go back into the Home tab and scroll back down, you will see £369,000 now has dropped down to 360. So that DCF tool is actually connected to the home assumptions on a live basis so that any updates that are made are automatically flowing through into this tab. And if we look at the affordable rent and target, these will be slightly different from shared ownership because we will look at additional parameters such as maintenance management and major life cycle costs. We wouldn't have equity stakes or rental yields, for instance. But this is operating in a very similar way where any of these purple boxes are changed, that will in turn update those DCFs, which will flow right back into that Home tab. So if we drop down to the construction costs box, we have a flat build cost, which again will take the BCIS rate of £2,175 per square meter, which represents the median rate from the BCIS API. If you just hover over that tooltip, you'll see that we actually provide you with the lower quartile, the median, the upper quartile, and the 80th percentile rates. Now, if we were to toggle on housing in this tab or any non-resi uses, then those costs would then flag up in this section as well. But this is a dynamic tool that will actually hide those so that you're not looking at kind of unneeded information. So you're only filling out what you need to for the purposes of the appraisal. There's then an externals assumption, abnormals on a pound per unit, other costs. So in this example, the app had picked up existing area in the site's boundary, and therefore it calculated a kind of holding assumption for demolition. But if there was any other infrastructure costs or any miscellaneous costs, that could be put into this cell. For contingency and fees, we have a contingency as a percentage, professional fees. S106 has been set at 0 because there is a SIL policy adopted for this site location. But in other site locations, there might be an automated amount for that. There's a vacant possession cost, a land fees cost as a percentage of land value, and that covers off kind of the development costs for the build aspect of the site. There's then a community infrastructure levy tab, which will bring in the SIL rates that we showed you in the previous video of £355, which would pertain to both the sale and the affordable. But the reason we split these out is because generally speaking, affordable will have 100% SIL relief, which is what the default is in this case. whereas the sale will have 0% sell relief, so it would be fully eligible for any sill cost. Now, it does have the option to put an existing area in, which will offset that sill calculation automatically. There's then two more tables, the grants by tenure. So for any of the tenures, you can indicate a grant on a pound per unit basis. And then for sales costs, you can enter in a percentage of GDV. This would most likely be covering off legal costs, agency costs, and marketing costs. And then the last table is the financing and profit table. So in this section, you'll indicate an interest rate, which will influence the financing calculation, the equity investment, which will also influence that calculation, profit on private elements of the site as a percentage of GDV, and then profit on the affordable elements of the site also as a percentage of GDV. Now, you'll often see that these might differ. This might be higher and this might be set at a lower rate. But for this example, we just set them both at 17.5%. And then lastly, in this tab, we have the profiles. So we split these up between cost and revenue. So for cost, you can indicate an S-curve or a flat profile, and then a start and an end date. And then for the revenue, you have three options. You can set a manual profile where you will set a start and end date, a golden brick, which will automatically align the profile to the construction profile. So in this case, from June 24th to June 2026. And then also a 50% SOS, 50% PC. That is translated to 50% start on site, 50% practical completion. That's effectively saying half will come at the start of construction and half will come at the end. Which you can see the first 3 tenures we've defaulted to manual profiles with kind of automatically generated start and end dates, and then the target rent was defaulted to golden brick. So that is all of the assumptions. And as I mentioned, we've made 2 changes here just to kind of recap that really quick. We've reduced the sales value cost to $500,000 per unit for a 1-bed, and we've lowered the shared ownership DCFs based on increasing the discount rate by about £10,000 per unit. So now there's 2 ways for us to understand what the impact of that is. If we now go and click out of this tab, so we went to any other tab on this site, it would automatically recalculate that land value so that you are positive and reassured that any changes you make in here will filter through into any of your other activity in the site. But if you didn't want to have to keep clicking in and out and you just want to understand what the quick impact is, you can also just click calculate right here. So if we look at £4.2 million being the residual land value before, that's now dropped to £4.03 million based on those changes. So it's now very, very close to that benchmark land value of $4 million. And just to demonstrate kind of, what would happen if we were to make another change. So let's say we put this up to 40% affordable and then recalc this again. We'll show you how this is useful in understanding viability. Okay, the residual land value is now dropped to £3.8 million. And we've now indicated that this is no longer viable based on a £4 million benchmark land value. So that is how you would use this input sheet. You can see it's quite quick and quite easy to update any of these inputs and then press that calculate button to understand what the impact is to the viability. So that is the site inputs tab. Now, again, this is all based on kind of you having run a site and then gone back into this tab to then modify or update any assumptions that you see fit. Now, it might be that you have assumptions that are bespoke to yourself or just bespoke to a client that you're running this on behalf of. For instance, a good example might be a discount rate. So if you're working with a registered provider or a housing association, they might have a lot of these assumptions fixed and bespoke to their own kind of appraisal format. And if you found that you kept having to go in and make the same assumptions, what you can actually do instead is go into our default inputs tab. So this is going to be a very similar format. You're going to see a lot of the same buttons, but they're all going to be blank. And that's because what we've done is we have effectively not set any defaults for any of these. But what you could do is you could go in and actually set a bespoke assumption that each subsequent site run would then flag through into the appraisal technology. So again, if we were to use that example of a discount rate, if you were to come in here and set this to 4.75 instead of 5.25, then when the next site that you run, it will use a 4.75% discount rate for the flats. So that gives you peace of mind that you can kind of set this tab so that it's bespoke to what you need it to be, which will make each subsequent site run a lot easier and a lot more accurate. So that is the inputs tab, and that's the end of this video. Thank you for listening.